This week on The Business of Tattooing, I'm joined by Selina Medina, veteran tattoo artist, vice president of the Alliance for Professional Tattooists, and a leading expert on tattoo industry regulations. Together, we pull back the curtain on the dangers of cheap imported products and the looming specter of government oversight. Selina helps break down the high-stakes battle to change the term injection in regulatory language, a fight that could determine if tattooing remains an accessible craft or becomes a cost-prohibitive medical procedure. We also analyze the damaging impact of Europe's REACH regulations and issue a powerful call to action for artists and manufacturers to get educated and unite. This episode is an essential guide to understanding the forces shaping your business and how to protect the future of tattooing. Buckle in for a crucial conversation about the existential threats facing the tattoo industry in this episode of The Business of Tattooing.
What's up, man?
What's happening? How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
You know, probably as good as just about everybody else.
It's a weird world right now.
It is. It is very strange.
It's like tattooing's thriving, but it's like not at the same time. It's like a very polarizing experience right now.
Is it thriving? Because I don't, it's a struggle for me to understand whether it is or not.
I think in certain spaces it is. I think if you're maybe a little more personal with your approach in tattooing, you have a tendency to connect with people a little bit more right now because I think people are just hungry for that. And
Yeah.
like they're almost kind of like missing that magic about
Yeah. Yeah.
tattooing like back in the day. Cause like that's what I've noticed at least. Like I've got, more customers than I know what to do with. And most of the time, the people that are coming to me are just like, man, I'm really hungry for like a personalized experience. Like
Yeah.
they're tired of all the diluted stuff and they're tired of like the chop shop approach or, like the really not personal experience. Like I think people are kind of moving over towards that direction. At least that's been my experience in the Charlotte area, at least.
Well, that's great because it's like a hit and miss with every artist that I talk to, right? Like some
Hmm.
artists like you are saying, "Oh, I'm booked. I got no problem getting clients in. I'm good. I'm solid." And then other artists are just like dead in the water, right? And they can't figure out why. Some of it I think is location based for sure. Some of it's what you're referring to. You know that mispersonal touch.
Hmm.
But I can tell you from the supply side, and not just me. I mean, I know a lot of people that are in the supply business, and I talk to pretty much all of them. And I mean, it's pretty much standard across the board. Everybody's down. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it indicates overall that the tattoo industry is down. You know what I mean? So I feel like it's been that way really though since COVID. I mean, it really hasn't really rebounded.
I don't think it rebounded. Like I'd say the year after COVID when there was a lot more expendable income in the marketplace, I think a lot of people were purchasing a lot more stuff, and maybe like a little more keen to try like the next big thing or stuff like that. But I feel like consumerism, like in general, in the supply market has definitely been down. But I also think that there's way more competition in the supply market now. I do think that there's a lot more companies that are out there. Um, some are doing things the right way and some are not. And, it's kind of like, what's the cheapest that people can afford to basically restock their shelves so that they can offer a service. So they're kind of gravitating towards like the cheaper products, not really understanding like what risks are associated with that. And I think that's kind of what's affecting what I would consider the ethical manufacturing firms. I would definitely lump you in that category as well as like some of the other like larger firms because like, I've talked with probably about 35 different companies over the last couple years, especially like post COVID and kind of like the work, with the nature of the work that I do.
Yeah.
I'm in like proximity with a lot of that stuff. And it's been consistent, like everybody's maybe 10, 20, sometimes even 50% of what their gross annual revenue was. But I've also seen where there's a lot more companies that are offering things on Amazon and they're offering more things like in like secondary like retail sites and things like that. And there's also like a lot of like these little I don't know, foreign companies that are coming in and they're selling all these products. And
Hmm.
it's definitely impeding the marketplace big time.
The Chinese companies, you mean?
Chinese, Taiwanese, Indonesian. I have seen some stuff coming out of South America. I have seen stuff coming out of Russia. And I've also seen some stuff coming out of Poland. So it's kind of like this mixed bag of just like stuff that really isn't like the right quality, but people like don't know why that quality matters. And there's kind of like this whole like rigmarole that's been happening because like obviously, like, it's no secret that I care very much about like the products and particularly like the inks and stuff. And most of the questions that I get from tattoo artists whenever I come in contact with them, or like if they message me or like DM me, is like, well, what do I need to be looking for? It's like, well, you need to be looking for transparency of ingredients and like transparency of like claims and like what are these companies saying? Like, how are they telling you that they're manufacturing their products? And most of the time, I would say tattoo artists can't answer that with the products that they have on their shelves. And
Right, right.
they don't really understand that ultimately it's our responsibility to protect our customers. Not only is that what they're paying for, like when they seek out a service with the tattoo artists, they're paying for their education, their knowledge, their understanding of the products, and then the quality of the products that they're acquiring, but it directly relates to their work. And like, a really good example of that would be like cheap sanitary cleaners. So the sanitary cleaners that we use for like disinfecting and things like that, you can always buy maticide, you can buy herbicide and like all the other different like sides, whatever. But if you don't know the source of what those chemicals are, you don't necessarily know if it's got the proper contact or kill time, and you may infect your other clients and you may have problems years down the road. It might not be a today problem, it might be several years.
Yeah. Yeah, I talk about a lot of the cheaper product stuff. It's kind of a passion subject of mine as well, just because. Well, I mean, and this isn't just um, focused on the tattoo industry. I mean, it's like a universal issue. I mean, not just in the tattoo industry. It's like this in all industries, right? It's like one big problem that I have is that a lot of American companies support Chinese manufacturing. Like, there's a lot of people that manufacture products in China. The problem, the problem that's becoming more and more prevalent today, and I still can't quite figure out. I think I know what the play is, but I'm not gonna really go out and say that this is what it is because I'm not 100% comfortable saying that yet. But there's definitely this big trade war going on. We definitely know that. There's this big war in the world about who's going to control, um, global trade. Who's going to be the mass supplier of all global goods, right? And I would say that for the most part, China's probably winning that war, right?
Hmm.
I'm not 100% there yet because I'm very, very much about data and facts, and I don't necessarily have all the facts. And a lot of what you see on TV isn't necessarily true. So you really got
Hmm.
to filter things. But what really disturbs me is the amount of years that American businesses have supported China manufacturing and really helped China build their manufacturing businesses, scale their businesses with American dollars going into China to pay for that manufacturing. And unfortunately, it's not so easy to pull that back away from China and say, okay, let's not do manufacturing here. Let's set it up in the United States because you can't. Not at the same cost. It's way more expensive to do that here. But the problem, Selena, is that you will go over and manufacture a product with a Chinese manufacturer and you can work with them for 15, 20 plus years. And you can have a solid relationship with these companies. And tomorrow, they will take your product, they will replicate it, they'll make it cheaper, less your quality standards, and then they'll bring it right back into the American marketplace and sell it for a third of what you're selling it for
Yeah.
directly to your customers. I just saw that company Ghost.
Hmm.
So they make those mayo trays with the magnetic tops, whatnot.
Yeah.
I just saw Chinese company has ripped them off now. I'm like, what the? I'm like, nothing is sacred. You know what I mean?
It it's consistently across the board. Like there's always like intellectual property rights concerns with dealing with like international companies because like there are no ramifications that prevent that. Thankfully, my pre-tariff situation and like trade war stuff, I started embarking in my customs brokerage license. So I started learning a lot more about customs and border patrol and like intellectual property rights and like preservation of like goods and service and like distribution. And I kind of started seeing some things like with the trends coming out of China and the products that were coming out of China. It's like almost every single thing that gets manufactured over there pretty much gets poached and it gets replicated or knocked off and sold right back to the American public because they just figure out a way how to do it cheaper
Hmm.
and they do it cost into business. But that is very much indicative to the culture. They always try to find a way to do things more cost effectively, and they're very frugal people in general. But it has created some significant disparity in the supply market because, let's just say hypothetically, like ink caps, you come up with a new ink cap situation, you may patent it, you may do all of these things to protect it here in the US, but that doesn't mean that that's protected over in China. So now what's happening with like the tariff situation, and I know everybody gets their feelings hurt about tariffs because it's making products and goods more expensive. Part of that is to protect intellectual property rights of the individual business owners who own the patents here in the US. So a lot of these laws have not really been enforced for the last like 10 to 15 years through like various administrations. And a lot of the laws and structures have been there. It's just currently now they're actually enforcing a lot of these things. So we're going to see like significant gaps in the industry. Like we're going to experience like challenges within the supply market. Like you may have a harder time getting like bed sheets. You may have a harder time getting mayo stand trays. You may have those issues because, it kind of works like from the back end of it. The US is great for a lot of things, but sometimes we don't really possess the forethought to understand the bottlenecks that happen 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road.
Right.
And back in the 1960s, there were a lot of laws that were enacted by the EPA because there was a lot of chemical leach off and improper disposing of like toxic chemicals and things, which significantly reduced the amount of manufacturing sites in the US. And largely, it's a big reason why a lot of manufacturing went to China, Mexico, and other countries where they don't have a strict enforcement, but they also don't have the same protections and rights for workers' laws. Like OSHA is not a thing in China,
Right.
all those different types of things. But now with the tariff situation and the incentivization that's happening with producing products in the US, I personally where I live, there's a lot of factories from the 1960s and the 1970s that have been decommissioned and are just sitting there. And I'm kind of wondering like at what point is somebody going to come in, repurpose those factories and actually start engaging in manufacturing materials here in the US because it's going to be more cost effective than paying the tariff, the fees, the port fees, all the other things that you have to pay for to get those products coming in from China. So like, at a certain point like yay, let's make more jobs, but there's the now where we have those bottlenecks and those separations and things. And for me, I've personally been stockpiling certain products that I know are just they don't age, they don't go bad, like bed sheets and ink caps and things like that. I would encourage anybody who's serious with tattooing to probably do the same because we just don't really know what's going to happen. And also, like, go spend your money, recalculate your money, maybe like eat at home like 5 nights a week instead of like going out to eat and door dashing every time that you have a tattoo, stuff like
Hmm.
that. I think like the culture of tattooing is also changing too along with that because of just how hard the supply markets are getting hit right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I get a lot of anxiety just thinking about like
Mhm.
all the changes in not just the tattoo world, but in the world in general. It's just like AI, supply chain issues, politics, social, just socialism in general in relation to the way people interact with one another and social media land and social sensitivity and just like it's just
Mhm.
so much stuff. Like,
There's so many different things that we have to consider, with this line of work. And I say line of work, including the manufacturers, because they also have to pay attention to like how they engage with people and what they do and what they put in their marketing materials and like all these other different things. I just think people are changing across the board in a response to the psychological like pushes that we've seen like in the post-COVID world. Like, you know, um an interesting trend that I've seen is people are more interested in talking about like mental health issues and, what anxiety they're facing externally, and then kind of normalizing the anxiety that they have with like collective groups and people are talking about these things more, which is fantastic because, people are developing more community, whether it be online or different things, and like those communities are kind of like sparking like healing and motivation and things because you've been in the tattoo industry for a really long time, so like you will probably resonate with this. I personally feel like I have a greater access to community now in the post-COVID world with the injection of like Zoom and like these meetings and like podcasts and stuff, and I feel like I have a greater community and presence there, but at the same time, like I also have more anxiety about the world in general, but at least I know that I myself am not alone and I have a community that I can kind of share those same sentiments with.
yeah, I agree. I I don't watch like a ton of TV, but usually when I have the TV on, I'm usually on YouTube and I'm just watching
Mhm.
like YouTube to me is like the best place to go for anything because it's just people like us that are like
Mhm.
it's a lot of it's better than reality TV even though it's reality TV because reality TV on TV is all scripted shit. It's just like what's going to
Oh
get
yeah.
ratings, but like YouTube is just people like us making videos talking about well, mental health, our struggles, our accomplishments, how we got from A to B, like which I really love that because there's not a lot of gatekeeping out in YouTube land. It's like, hey, let me show you how to bring more tattoo clients in. Let me show you how I made X amount of money last year. You can replicate this. You can do this. You don't have to hire fancy marketing firms and pay marketing firms thousands of dollars to do this for you. You just have to put in a little bit of work. And I love YouTube because it just is a lot of people sharing information there. So that's great.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of my more favorite things to do is like going into like the tattoo like content stuff and like going into like the old archives and like watching stuff about like our forefathers and our foremothers and tattooing, and being able to kind of like go back and like read those pieces and like watch those pieces of like history, and then like seeing the here and the now with like what people are doing with like marketing, because like I'm a solo studio owner, but I also run like a private shop, so I'm always interested in like how can I save time with my marketing efforts? What do I need to be doing differently? And it's simple, but just yesterday I took a class from Ryan Roy, for anybody
Yeah.
not familiar. Um Mainly because like I was kind of like not really sure how to approach marketing now because like I haven't had my hands in my own marketing for a few years. But thankfully, like he broke it down and made it ridiculously simple. And, it was really nice to be like, oh, so I'm not totally crazy. I wasn't introducing the right kind of messaging to invite people into a conversation. Like maybe I need to slightly adjust and do these different things. And, it's just really helpful because like a lot of his content's on YouTube. There's a lot of different things that are out there. And to be honest, like I even use it for some of the scientific and analytical stuff that I do when I'm engaging with like regulatory efforts around tattoo ink. Like, sitting through a panel, how somebody explains like what toxicology breakdowns are because I'm listening to a lecture from like Harvard or some particular professor, that type of stuff exists out there. And YouTube is kind of like a wealth of information if you just kind of go to start looking.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I spend hours watching YouTube videos. It's crazy.
Mhm.
And sometimes I don't know if it's good or bad. I think sometimes it adds to my anxiety a little bit, but well, I definitely want to get into regulatory talks with you
Sure.
because you're definitely who I would consider one of the experts in the industry in relation to your knowledge in regards to everything that's happening in the tattoo world, everything that has been happening in the tattoo world for the last several years, especially. But before we get into all that, I want to get a little bit of your backstory out here. I want to talk about, how long you've been in the industry, how you got in the industry, what keeps you here, because you've got a lot of different things that you've done, a lot of different paths you've walked that you still walk. You're a very busy person, so I kind of want to crack that open a little bit.
Yeah. Well, like most of us, I was kind of a misfit teenager and didn't really know what I was going to do with life. I had pretty good grades, but not quite good enough grades to warrant any kind of like scholarships. I've always been obsessed with chemistry. That's always been like my focus, like data, analytics, chemistry, statistics, in anything in that bubble makes my brain very happy. And then when I was about 14 years old, I was actually introduced to a tattoo artist, and he kind of offered me a job as a joke because he was like, "Oh, you can draw. Maybe I should teach you how to tattoo." And, it was kind of like that, oh shit, that might be something that I can actually do. Well, I took a bunch of art classes, didn't really have any major prospects for college, job. Military wasn't something that I wanted to do. I didn't really want to wind up racking up thousands of dollars in school debt because I was looking at my friends who were facing that fate. And I was like, man, that's really fucking scary. Signing up for $150,000 of debt that I'm going to have to pay off for an education that doesn't guarantee me a job. No,
Right.
I'm good. So, 16 years old, I left home and started tattooing at a walk-in street shop right off military base. And kind of the rest was history from that. I worked for the gentleman for about 9 years, and then I started getting tattooed by another tattoo artist who had more of like a traditional Japanese background in traditional tattooing style. And it was like suddenly like a light bulb went off in my head. Like, I'm participating in a thing that is much bigger than me, and there is a lot of history about it. And I had never really been exposed to the history of tattooing or any of like the deep-seated culture that comes with like that traditional method of tattooing. And then all of a sudden it was like new creative energy, new creative inspiration. And I drove so hard into it that I kind of blended Japanese tattooing with realism and like a lot of botanical work. And then I started practicing with cover-ups. And cover-ups became something of an expert for me because the experience that I had with, helping somebody feel more comfortable in their skin became it for me. Making people happy in their skin, giving them something, when they have like this awful tattoo that's associated with like these awful memories. Maybe they're an addict in recovery. Maybe they had like a really awful incident, or maybe they got some new information. They need to change the tattoo. Any one of those types of things, and helping those people feel whole again and feel comfortable in their skin and kind of fighting like body dysmorphia to like a certain point kind of became like my primary focus in tattooing. And I got involved with regulation probably at about 15 years into tattooing. The studio owner that I was working with was starting to experience some problems with the local health department because, you know, as I'm sure every tattooer that listens to this, they've had an overzealous health department inspector in their studio barking orders at them and just going through like the whole rigmarole. And like I just kind of pulled her aside and I was like, "Hey, what's the problem? Like what's going on? Like here's our HACCP manual, here's our exposure control plan, here's what's going on with biologicals. Like, why is there a problem and why are you so demanding?" Well, then I figured out she was having some insecurities through conversation. She didn't outwardly admit it, but it was like, 2 weeks into the job, it was her first tattoo shop inspection. And I was like, hey, let's stop there. I'm not your enemy. I'm a tattoo artist. I'm really confident. I'm really qualified, professional. this is how I do business, this is how we do things, and then I kind of intervened in the situation, and then I started kind of understanding that she just really didn't understand what she was looking at, and she was just nervous, and her nervousness was coming out as being an overzealous health department inspector. So then the common human denominator kind of started taking an influence, and then I kind of started, understanding the health department inspectors a little bit more, because
Hmm.
like, I started seeking out different avenues and opportunities to try to work with health department officials, because I kind of figured, all right, well, this is nice and all that, there's a human component to this, but how are we protecting the business of tattooing? Like, what's really happening there? And shortly thereafter, I had gotten involved with APT as kind of like the gold standard of what should be done in the practices of tattooing. And then eventually that led into AFTO, NEHA, all these other different crazy acronyms. And, when I use the acronyms, most of the time they are national partnerships. And those national partnerships are a collective base for either regulatory agents like FDA, health department, boards, cosmetology boards, like all those individuals. That's the place where they go find the information. And I also had noticed somewhere around the same time that APT was not involved in the conversation. And personally, I had a problem with that because I didn't feel like our industry was being represented in a way that was meaningful, that would actually protect the business of tattooing, but also uphold safe ethics. Because like most folks that are interested in this type of stuff, I maintain ridiculously high standards in my own studio. I'm very cautious about the contraindications. I'm very concerned with the chemicals, like what's happening, and, down to the human component of, if my client experiences a problem and they shoot me a text about it and they shoot me a picture, I'm very quick to want to address it and say, okay, let's try to protect the tattoo. Let's try to protect you. What happened here? What did you become exposed with? And then all of a sudden I started noticing none of this information was actually conducted. And then that kind of made me go, wait a minute. You mean that none of this stuff has actually been looked at in a way, and there's not like some base of information for this? And then immediate like panic button went off in my head, because I started seeing the efforts that FDA was starting to make in coming down with regulation with tattoo inks. And then I started understanding, okay, well, the quality of the tattoo ink affects my work. I can learn all of these things about tattoo ink and how it impacts my work and the longevity for my client. But there's also the threat to the business of tattooing. Holy shit, there are so many tattooers that have no freaking clue about what's going on in the world. And
Right.
that was about 10 years ago. And since then, I've made it a substantial portion of my business, but also just ethically to promote safe tattooing, but also education in the community. And back in about 2015 was when I became affiliated with APT. And since then, I've been on the board in one capacity or another as like an advisor, or actually serving on the board. And now I'm in my tenureship of the vice presidency at the APT. And, we've seen a substantial amount of progress in the last 10 years in this space. So, it's protecting the business of tattooing, but it's also what we ethically should be doing as practitioners of tattooing. If we know that the information is not out there, we as a collective group should be assembling that information so that we can leave tattooing better than what we found it.
Right, right.
Hmm.
No, it's commendable that it's commendable. I like talking to people like you that have just taken such an interest in safety and regulations, because I think, like, I talk about it a lot, having a supply company. I used to go to a lot of the local shops around here. We'd make deliveries way back in the earlier days of our business, and it was pretty interesting the differences from one shop to another. Like, you'd go into some shops where it would be like crystal clear, clean, like, just, you could just tell these shop owners were just very much about the professional stance of tattooing. And then you could go into some, I mean, hell, even go back. I mean, Jesus, let's go back 25 years. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't know how, I remember shops 25 years
Yeah,
ago,
I do too.
the biker shops and stuff like that. And then
Yep.
I think, like, I mean, I remember going into shops where there's porno mags sitting on the table in the waiting room, like straight up hardcore porn magazines. And
Mhm.
I mean, you don't see anything like that today, God, but back then it was just kind of a common thing. It was like what I mean, even the motorcycle magazines had naked women in them. You know what I mean? Like it was just
Oh yeah, yeah, like Easy Rider was a big deal,
yeah,
and then you had like Hustler magazines and stuff all the time. And like there was a shop that I used to work in that was like that. And like I had just become so desensitized to it, not really thinking about like how does this make my female customers feel? And then eventually like, the owner at that time kind of caught wind of that type of stuff and decided he was going to clean up the shop because he started noticing that, the shop was not having like maybe the best appearance in like public appearances. And
yeah,
like I kind of walked through that with him of like let's clean up the shop, let's do all these different things. And at the time I didn't fully understand it, but way back when, that was just common.
yeah, yeah,
It was just common. And like there were a lot of like strange things, like people would still like manufacture their like stencil solutions and things like that. Or there was a microwave that was in the tattoo shop that was just for like making the stencil crap. Or like there were blenders in the back room because we were still manufacturing like our own tattoo ink out of like Pelican drawing ink and different things like that, where you'd go to the art store and buy a bottle of ink.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
it just was a very different world. But there are some good things that have happened more with like the commercialization of tattooing, as I think like the bar has been gradually raised, and I think it's continuing to be gradually raised, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
No, it's a great thing actually, and the point was that it's admirable to see some artists out there that are really because you're right, there across the industry there's just a massive void of knowledge. You know what I mean, and just a
Yep.
massive void of really people being tuned into what you got people in the industry making a living on the industry, and they really
Hmm.
don't know anything about the industry. That's
Yep.
and that's a big problem. And it continues to be a problem. But I think with help of the APT, NEHA, AFTO, individual people like you, me, all these other people that are out there, spreading awareness and the message, I think it's going in the right direction. But my biggest struggle is just the lack of progress. Like you were saying, 10 years ago, and I went to the AFTO conference in Dallas for the first time this year. And
Oh.
And well, I was really surprised. Like I sat there just kind of silent the whole time and I just listened to the presentations. I
Hmm.
didn't say much. I didn't ask questions. I just kind of sat there and absorbed everything. I listened and absorbed. And then at the end, th- there were a couple things that were really interesting to me in that experience. One was when we had the AFTO luncheon, which was just a room filled with everybody. I mean, it had all the food people, all the drug people, I mean, there was 500 people in that room. And we sat at a table and there was a food inspector, a restaurant inspector from New York City sitting at our table. And we
Hmm.
got engaged in a conversation with him. And it was probably one of the better conversations that I had over the whole course of that event
Hmm.
because I learned a lot about the mindset of an inspector talking to this guy, right?
Yeah.
And it was a very interesting perspective. He said, look, we don't ever go in a place because I had these preconceived ideas from these stereotypical thoughts that I had about regulatory inspectors and just like these bad feelings that I had about it. You know what I mean? Like I'm scared of these people. You know what I mean? Like I don't
Yeah.
want you coming to my place. Stay away. But then I'm listening to this guy talking, he's like, hey, look, it's never our objective to come in and shut down a restaurant. Like, we don't want to put people out of business. We just are concerned with public health and safety, and that's it. And as long as everything's good, everything's good. And if it's not like we're going to board your windows up and put you out of business tomorrow. We're just going to give you a piece of paper that says, here's what's wrong. I'll be back in a couple weeks to check to make sure all this stuff is corrected,
Yeah.
and so but he was telling us this story about in New York City they were tearing this restaurant down that was across the street from another restaurant that he was inspecting. And
Hmm.
he said when they tore this building down across the street, I mean, New York City has a massive rodent problem, right? Rats and rodents.
Yep.
So this old dilapidated building was obviously filled with rodents. So when they tore it down, all these rodents are got to go somewhere, right? So of course, where do they go? Across the street.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So this guy goes in to inspect this restaurant and he's like, dude, he's like, I've never seen anything like this infestation that was in this place. And he goes, we did not shut them down, right? So that was like really telling to me. I was like, wow, you guys, he's like, we had to have them shut down for 24 hours. They call an exterminator. You guys got to get rid of this rat problem. Got to get rid of these rodents, right? Well, then he goes, I got another call the very next day, a complaint against the same place. And so I go in and I'm like, what the? And so he's like, it's from the exterminator. And the exterminator's like, dude, this place is infested so bad. I don't even have the ability to deal with this. Like, you need to burn this place down pretty much. And I'm like, oh my gosh. But
Uh,
the thing I took away from that story was that number one, they're not our enemies,
yep.
right? And what you said really reinforces that feeling because when you were talking about the inspector that you first got engaged with, and you're like, hey, wait a minute, let's have a conversation. You know what's really
Yeah.
I got that too from that AFTO conference was that the regulators gravitate to tattoo artists like magnets,
Yeah.
especially like someone fresh that comes in. Like they were like all over me because they were like, "Oh, you're an ink manufacturer, blah blah blah. Well, I want to talk to you. What I want to
Yeah.
understand." They really just want an education and they want to understand. They don't know. And so that's exactly spot on what you said. I got the same thing at the AFTO conference. But now,
It's strange because like when people go to that the first time, like I can't tell you how many tattoo artists have told me over the years, like, I would be terrified to do that. And I'm like, why? They're just people. Like, there was a certain presentation I did in Arizona where the Surgeon General's office was in the presentation, like the Army Surgeon General was in the presentation.
yeah,
I had not been warned that this individual was going to be in the building. And,
wow,
it was kind of one of those things where I was like, because I saw him, I grew up around military, so like I can clock a uniform from a mile away, so like I know what certain stars and bars mean. And like I'm setting up for this tattoo and I did a live tattoo demonstration at AFTO several years ago and I was actually tattooing a health department inspector. Ironically, because we had become friends through doing some of the work like on the labeling and additives petitions and all that
mhm.
type of stuff. And she's sitting there, she's getting ready to get tattooed. And like this two-star general comes walking in to the conversation. And like, I've got a camera on me, I'm wearing a microphone, and I'm doing a tattoo and like all these conditions. And he's like straight up just like standing over top of me. And I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. All right. Mind you, I'm doing a fine line tattoo at that. So like
Oh,
every single condition to make like your anxiety go through the roof, and I'm like sweating bullets and answering all these questions. And then it kind of like really reinforced the fact like they don't understand anything about our craft. They have been charged to protect public health, and therefore they are overseeing the practices and the principles of tattooing, and they just need a source and a space in which to learn that.
yeah,
And in order to promote that, which, kind of circumvents the problems that a tattoo artist has, like in their independent practice, like in their counties, in their states, in their cities and whatnot, we always encourage from like the APT side to encourage those health departments to actually join those agencies like AFTO and NEHA because they speak regulator. And when we're experts and we go into the room, we have to learn how to speak their language. And then there's like the common denominator. And most of the time, it's like either misinformation, a little bit of bias, and sometimes just general anxiety because they're scared of doing the wrong thing. Like almost every single house department inspector I've ever met over the years, and this year actually this August actually marked 10 years of me doing this type of work. Um, they all want to do a good job.
Hmm.
They don't want to treat people crappy. They don't want to shut down your business. They, if anything, they're more curious than anything else. And they're going to ask you questions because they just legitimately don't understand. And I
Right.
have not met many inspectors that have a lot of tattoos. Like, I think generally their psychology is more of like, oh no, I'm not going to do anything that's outside of the norm. And they're typically a little more on like the cookie cutter rule follower side of things. So like tattoos may not necessarily happen too much, but then, we're starting to see a trend of like the millennial health department inspectors that are coming in that have like a couple tattoos and they're like, gee, I got tattooed so many years ago and I didn't realize they were doing something wrong. Holy
Yeah.
crap. Like, let me talk to a competent tattoo artist now. Like, just as the same experience that you probably, like, I can only imagine what your experience was walking in the room and having, yeah, hi, I manufacture tattoo ink. Plus, I've been tattooing for, so many years. And then they're just kind of like, new person. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And they run
Yeah.
up to you and you feel like vaguely like a celebrity. And then, like, you walk out of the conversation with like friends. Like,
Well,
it's,
yeah. Yeah. I think the struggle for me personally on the regulatory side of things, like with AFDO and, because I'm on the AFDO calls and I'm
Mhm,
trying to be, we worked together for a while, a
mhm,
couple of years ago. Uh, but my struggle's always been like, um, not knowing enough. You know what I mean? In regards to like agendas, right? Like I feel like I don't know all the players in the chessboard, like when I go into the AFDO room, I'm like, I don't know who all these people are. I don't know how long they've been here. I don't know what their agendas are. I don't know what their motive is behind the questions that they're asking me. Therefore, I don't know how safe I feel sharing information. You know what I mean?
yeah.
This is like where I struggle at the most and where I continue to struggle because I want to help. I want to be like a voice for change and I want to be a supporter. Obviously, I'm a very strong proponent about safe manufacturing and
Mhm.
transparency in manufacturing. I mean, I'm very much about that. But also at the same time, when I get in a room full of people, I'm like, "Ugh, I don't know who you are. I'm not sure if it's safe to talk about this stuff." Because at the same time, I'm just as concerned with protecting the industry and the integrity of the industry and the history of the industry. And I'm like, I don't want to do anything or say anything that's going to potentially be detrimental or lead us down the wrong path because there's a big war over language in this regulatory
Yes.
speak, right? Like that injection word. Like if you accidentally say the wrong word to the wrong person and their agenda is such that like they're going to cling to that word and they're going to be like Rob said blah 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 and then I'm like, "Wait a minute. That's not what I meant." You know what I mean? So,
That that right there is the number one reason why I tell persons who are interested in safety, on the manufacturing side or on the individual tattoo artist side or like on the cottage manufacturing side, like for the folks that produce like their own aftercare, or like manufacture their own tattooings in their studios, like regardless of what like what point of the pendulum that you're swinging on, be affiliated with a constituent body. The reasoning for that is there is some protections that affords you, but it also gives you shoulders to lean on with other manufacturers or other tattoo artists or other people in the room. The reason why that's so important is one, you get a different perspective and you get more of a holistic perspective before you have the conversation or after you have the conversation before you answer something like that is critical so that you do not pigeonhole and kind of disrupt the entire matrix of tattooing because like it is a very complicated regulatory landscape and I don't think a lot of people are really truly aware of it until they actually sit in some of those rooms and then all of a sudden they realize that a microbiologist from FDA is sitting right next to you sharing lunch and
mhm.
then they start asking very engaging questions and they want to know about your sanitation practices in your manufacturing setting. When was the last time you engaged in this type of testing? When was the last time you engaged in this type of testing? To a certain point, they are asking some of these things off the record, but ultimately they do have to put some of that in their reporting. And that is the same with any regulator. That doesn't matter if they are a county inspector, a state inspector, or a federal inspector. There's all different levels with this type of stuff. And I just don't think a lot of people have been kind of trained enough before they go into those conversations to really understand what they're dealing with. And then it also reverts back to something else that's really critical, which is language. Language is absolutely critical at this particular type of juncture, because if the language is wrong, then you start having fractionalization between different states and different state policies. And then you start dealing with things like Prop 65 in California, where that is not a thing in the rest of the United States. And there's only certain provisions for importing products into California that you just basically have to have different labels. And you have to have like all of these different things associated with it to be legally compliant. Otherwise, you wind up facing burdensome costs to your business. You also wind up facing like fines or other potential things that happen in that space. But the things that happen and occur in California may not happen in New Jersey, may not happen in Florida, but may kind of happen in Texas, and like, all these different things like that. And I think, a lot of tattoo artists in general across the board are particularly angry with the health departments because they just haven't done very much to kind of circumvent a lot of like the problematic tattooing that we're seeing, like the 3-day, 2-day classes of people tattooing, and then all of a sudden they get into like these small, like suite type of environments and they're butchering people left and right. And the ethical tattoo artists, they're struggling to make ends meet in their business, and they're like, yo, why the hell is the health department not doing something about this? Well, it's kind of both sides of the fence. Like the health department doesn't know enough to actually enforce something, and there's not really enough coffers of information out there that's accessible for the health department to come to and realize that, hey, there's a different way that this should be handled or this should be treated. And also, as a tattoo artist or an independent manufacturer, you're scared to say anything because you don't want to cut the throat of your competitor. And then, that erupts into a whole bunch of other different problems because, the agreements and, a lot of the manufacturers that personally I've known, they have long-standing agreements and friendships with each other, and they've known each other for a really long time. Like, I'm sure you've got buddies. I've talked with almost every manufacturer at this point, and they all have different relationships and things like that. They're not interested in having a conversation because they're too nervous and anxious with what's going on in those rooms and who's sitting in those rooms, that I think it's really important to, kind of hit the pause button, get involved with constituent bases, be it a nonprofit agency erecting another nonprofit, working with APT or different constituent bodies. Because, like, when I say constituent body, what I mean is this, it's really specific. It's a group that forms a collective opinion. That matters when you start dealing with regulatory, because if you can show a constituent base or a group of people that share the same opinion, your opinion becomes more weighted when you start dealing with health departments or you start dealing with like public agencies and things like that, because the collective opinion of many pulled into one under an umbrella with things like that tends to go further in the terms of regulations. That way, nobody gets pigeonholed into one specific thing. And like, just like how some people like Coke, or they may like Dr. Pepper, or they may like Pepsi, or they may like Sprite, all the manufacturers and ink manufacturers that I've worked with in the last decade, every single one of them has different hallmarks to their products. And those hallmarks correspond to the markets that they serve and the artists that they serve and the way that those artists work. So, we're going to have different formulations, but the actual oversight of the laws with FDA are meant to just provide a regulatory framework. So, you know, there's a lot that gets into that. But I am glad that you did get to go to AFTO and actually see it in person and kind of like experience that.
Yeah, I needed to. I'm
Mm.
I also went to the World Conference Tattoo Pigments. Were you part of that
Yep.
too this year?
Yeah, I was in Rome this year. I've been working on some research under APT to, for lack of a better term, um, refute the terminology injection with tattooing.
Right.
We've been working really hard on that for the last few years. And now we're able to produce peer-reviewed research that says that tattooing is not an injection. We're hopeful that that will be actually published in the next couple of months. We worked with a really prolific institution, mainly just because that language is so problematic, and being in those spaces like with the World Tattoo Pigment Conference, you know, I was the director of research. Now that position's been backfilled by Michaela. She's fantastic. She's in the process of getting her PhD. And I'm working with her and kind of teaching her and showing her the ropes with what's going on with, research, because there's a really big bubble and a lot of different things. And this year, I think the highlights were on the World Tattoo Pigment Conference were the problems specifically with reach. And, everybody had this idealistic mindset that the reach laws were going to handle so many different things and it was going to wind up being so great, at least from the regulatory communities. Manufacturers obviously had a problem with it because of the deficit to the business and how much it increased the cost of business, but also some of the methods and the levels that they're talking about are completely unobtainable, and the labs themselves can't even really test to the percentages and toxicology ratings that they have aforementioned. And point blank, the numbers are wrong. And that was highlighted this year at the World Tattoo Pigment Conference. For anyone not aware, they they have an in-person session that you can participate and be there. It is a little bit more expensive because you're there in person. But flip side of that coin is you can also attend remotely, like I think you did this year.
Yeah, I did.
Because my assistant at the time, she sent me a picture and she was like, "Do you know this guy?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do, but I'm like 9 hours ahead. And I don't want to be an asshole and like text him at 4 o'clock in the morning his time."
It was it was early. I was like, God, I got to get up at 2:30 in the morning to hear this freaking talk. And I did, because it was like really important stuff, and I'm really trying to I feel like the tattoo ink manufacturers are grossly misrepresented in the regulatory
Yes.
discussion, right? So like, and I also don't feel like I'm necessarily the best person today to be at the
Mhm.
at the head of that table, because um, I'm only 3 years into ink manufacturing. There's a lot of guys out there that've been manufacturing inks for a lot longer than me, that understand the science behind tattoo inks much, much greater than I do. Every day I'm still learning things, and it's always an educational journey for me. That's why
Yeah.
it's so important for me to be involved in these groups and these discussions, because I'm really trying to understand the impact of regulations on the future of tattoo ink. You know what I mean? And then even under that layer, how does that trickle down into aftercare? How's that going to trickle down into cleansers? How's that going to trickle down into lidocaine products? All the products that we use day to day in our craft, are all going to be eventually impacted by government regulations and oversight. Which they should be. I've felt that way for a long time. I'm not afraid of regulations. I just want to make sure that during I think one of the biggest threats to tattoo ink today are reach regulations. I think
Mhm.
that's a huge problem for the ink manufacturers, because I think we heard the guy that makes the ink in Europe. It's I can't remember. It's like Just Ink or something like that is the brand name.
Oh, I am ink.
I am ink. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Michael. Yeah, he definitely had significant problems. I'm pretty close with Michael. We've worked together on a number of things over the years, and you know, I had done a podcast some years ago, and he had reached out to me personally, and then we immediately started chatting, and then over the years, like we've kind of formed a pretty solid friendship, and we go back and forth on different things. And what's interesting to me is his personal experience, and he was kind of a tattoo artist that kind of got caught in a holding pattern and was also super frustrated with what was happening with the regulations, but also ethically wanted to do the right thing. So he kind of took it upon himself. He became a chemical engineer in the process of this. So his background's in chemical engineering. He went to a 5-year institution to basically get a degree and go through all these different things. And he manufactured his own products because he just didn't want to use anything else after he'd started kind of seeing behind the veil and like what was happening with ink. And he had become an expert with it. And He was actually one of the first people that challenged the European Commission over their ruling banning blue 15 and green 7, citing that the color permanence was not the same and it would disrupt like the marketplace. And because there was a lack of unification, and there were not systems like what we have here in the United States with the constituent bases and constituent bodies like the APT and AFTO and NEHA. They didn't have that in Europe, so Europe basically just kinda steamrolled him and pushed the law through anyway. And, I believe Michael's been doing this stuff for 12 to 15 years, I think. I
Mhm.
can't remember the specifics. We talked about it back in Rome, this last session, but he's told me for years, like, manufacturers need to be involved in these conversations. There needs to be a constituent base. We were not able to do that in Europe, and this is the very real threat is reach if there's not a cooperative effort with manufacturers across the board in the United States. And really the rest of the world's really looking at America and watching this very, very closely because I don't know if anyone else really is in the room. I know you know about this, but the American manufacturing of tattooing really supplies a global market. Australia primarily gets their products from here. South America gets their products from here, as does certain parts of Russia, China, etc. Like, tattoo ink is not manufactured in very many places in the world. There's like a handful of countries in Europe, a couple spots in like Russia and Poland and things like that. But outside of that, there's really not a major manufacturing site aside from what's here in the United States. So, I've talked with the Australian Tattooers Guild, and they are incredibly anxious and wanting to know what's going on with Mocha and how that influences their supply chain because it has like this big cascade and this big trickle down effect. So, any manufacturer that is listening in the conversation right now, I cannot impress upon you that the time is now to get joined in some type of a association for manufacturers of all types of products, not just the tattoo inks. That includes aftercares, that includes the lidocaines, that includes all of this stuff because at a certain point in time, the regulations are going to significantly impact your business. And if you're not a part of a constituent base or a collective thought or group of opinion, your business may be lost in the process of this. And
Yeah.
we don't really know what's going to happen in the regulatory sense because, over the last 10 years, I've seen so many things change through like the different administrations, also through what happened with COVID and, all these different things. And there are a lot of things that are going on in regulation that we have never seen. And political analysts, different lobbyists that I've spoke with, senators, regulators across the country, and to be frank, a lot of these people have thrown their hands up because they were just completely confused about what's going on. So there is a safety in numbers and protection for the businesses that way.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to focus on here in the United States is the fact that there are no FDA approved color additives, right? So like
Mhm.
that's the focus of the
Mhm.
FDA with Mocha. Like now you have these Mocha regulations in place, but now the FDA is really trying to go through and really like tighten up what those regulations need to look like, define on a finer level
Yep.
what those regulations mean and what the implications are to manufacturers and well, we're going through safety substantiation process now through AFTO with all the ingredients in tattoo ink, right? Like we're breaking it down ingredient by ingredient.
Mhm.
What's the safety risk of this ingredient? And so that's going on right now. So then my biggest fear though is that after I had heard Michael talk at the WCTP this year, he was saying basically how it's pretty much impossible to manufacture inks to reach regulations. Like
Yes.
it's very very difficult to manufacture inks under the reach regulations. And now my biggest fear is that will reach regulations go global because we all know that Europe is the gold standard when it comes to consumer safety and cosmetic products. I feel like they are. You don't feel
I
like
don't
that?
know. But this is also as somebody who's deeply involved with cosmetic science as a whole. So any of the practices of tattoo ink, aftercare products, and some French drug products like topical lidocaine solutions and whatnot, like numbing agents and things. That's all cosmetic science. Cosmetic science, what we've found is, yes, there are stronger regulations around the quality of the products, but I personally don't feel that the colors that have been deemed safe in accordance with REACH have been well enough researched to deem that as appropriate.
Well,
Um, I would say another really good example of this, phthalocyanide, which is blue 15, green
mhm,
7. They have a chemical structure that the center nucleotide on the particle itself is copper. So the reason why blue 15 and green 7 got cast out in REACH is because it was a part of a regulation associated with cosmetics with hair dye.
right.
Cosmetic hair dye is reactive chemistry. Tattoo inks are inert chemistry. So there is no chemical interaction that causes the particles to accelerate or explode or excise, meaning that they don't produce heat, they don't produce chemicals, they don't do any of that. But because of the buckets that Reach worked with under, they basically cast blue 15 and green 7 out with no real information as to how it pertains to tattoo inks. So in my thought process, there are several other chemicals that they have done that with, that they scrutinized unfairly and unjustly, and basically put the consumer more at risk, because they just said, okay, we're going to throw everything into these buckets, and if it's in this buckets, we're just going to assume that it's bad, not accounting for the replacement chemicals that have to be used in lieu of those products, that those chemicals wind up having a higher problematic outcome. A really good example of that, so you have green 7 and green 36. Well, green 36 is brominated, and that has a lot more health consequences in long-term data, and under UV light is actually relatively fragile, and that's supposed to be the new safer thing within reach. So I don't think the assessment that European products being safer is accurate at all. I really don't.
Well, let me clarify what I mean by that. So, and I'm not talking specifically about tattoo ink anymore. I'm just
Mhm.
talking about on a broad cosmetic scale, and my observations in relation to the way uh, the way you have to register products in Europe versus how you have to register them anywhere else. It's a much more stringent process in Europe that you have to go through
Sure.
for registry. But when I look at I feel like Europe really scrutinizes ingredients in products a lot more than other places in the world. So,
They do.
for example, let's look at like the FDA and the recent ban of the red food dye, right? Like this is a good prime example of this, right? Because for years there's been tons of studies on that red food dye in the United States, but we've allowed it to remain in our food for years and years and years, despite all of the research and data, right? But now
Yep.
RFK comes in and he's like, wait a minute, this we're going to ban this now.
Mhm.
Why does it take so long for the United States to recognize a health issue with an ingredient in especially a food product? Like,
A failure in the infrastructure of the FDA system, which I am hopeful with RFK changing over, because um regulatory land, it takes 25 to 30 years before anything becomes a thing with FDA in previous administrations. I am slightly hopeful that RFK is addressing that, because they're shortening some of the timelines with some of the products that are coming back into the market. They're also removing a lot of like the extra fluff, and they're kind of, in lack of a better term, they're trying to do away with some of the lobbying efforts that come in with things like that. So the red dyes that got cast out, that were basically made illegal and removed out of the category for food products, those products had basically been lobbied by different color manufacturers through the United States. And, when you pay a certain amount of money, you can go to Congress and you can talk and you can whisper in the ear and you can, offer subjugated data that looks favorable because of this and because of that. Well, after so long and you grease so many palms, a lot of stuff kind of gets turned a blind eye to. And when we saw a lot of people being removed from FDA, Some of them had been engaging in some whistleblowing activities, and some were engaging in some unethical activities as well. If you're a regulator, chances are you're not being paid very well. So if somebody is going to pay you a certain amount of money, you're probably going to feel a certain way about things. And I suspect that, like that, in the same categories with drug products and the other things that have happened in the United States, I think that that's been the status quo for a really long time, and I think RFK is going through and removing those threats and how that influences the public health. And I think that's where a lot of the changes in like restructuring and like outlawing and banning of ingredients and actually taking the science and, applying it to the products that people come in contact with, I think is a good thing in this administration, but it's going to be a little bit chaotic for a while. I think we're going to see a lot of stuff changing and kind of maneuvering. I don't necessarily disagree that Europe has better standards when it comes to foods because, if like most people, I've been over to Europe and I've not had significant allergy product, issues, which is largely the reason why I started studying anything about ingredients anyway and how it trickled down into my love for the tattoo inks and products that way. But, in Europe, they have a lot of standards of things that can be kind of slightly goofy. So, I think they scrutinize and demonize individual ingredients, but I don't think that they're taking into account the byproducts of the chemicals being added together and those products actually being tested. So, a really good example of that would be cosmetic products. They're allowed to have up to 10% ethanol in them.
Mhm.
Well, ethanol over a certain concentration can actually cause blindness. A lot of people don't know that. But a lot of the times, the products that are sold over the counter, they may contain a lot more concentration of like ethanol and things of that nature, or methanol. And those are toxic chemicals that are supposedly banned, but they're allowed to be used in lieu of other products like I think it's BIT. BIT is like a preservative agent. Basically, it prohibits like mold and bacteria being used or growing in like soaps and shampoos and things like that. Well, you're not
Right.
going to use BIT in Europe, period. It's entirely banned. But you can use ethanol.
Yeah.
So like
It's
that
strange.
yeah, which is really strange because, like, I was very fortunate when I started manufacturing tattooing. I became really good friends with a cosmetic scientist who worked on global products. And like, I had the same opinion, like, oh yeah, European products are superior, this, that, and the other. And she's like, no, no. Hold that, hold the phone. Let me show you something. And I went through the regulatory tables and I actually started looking at like the concentration percentages and like what was allowed for like topical application or dermal application and like all these different things. And I was like, huh, what? You mean it's okay to have 10% ethanol to the weight and the volume of the fucking product, but I can't use BIT, which is basically salt? Huh?
Right.
Like, are you fucking kidding? Nope. It's Europe. It is yeah, it looks great. It seems like it's awesome and like, there's some counterculture and like social influence at least like within our generations, European is so much better. No. No, it's not.
Yeah, yeah, that's not entirely what I meant. But what I meant was just that like their their scrutiny of products is like seems to be a lot more stringent, than other places. And so when I look at things like that, it makes me say like, well, are other regulatory places in the world like Canada, Australia? I mean, I know Canada and Australia are just kind of like you said, just kind of sitting in observation mode, waiting to see what's going to happen, kind of a thing. But I feel like now all the pressure's on the United States and the FDA to say, okay, now what are we going to do with this, right?
Yep.
Because here's what Europe's done. What are we going to do? And my biggest fear is like reach regulations just kind of make their way into the FDA language.
I'm sure some private companies and private equity firms would absolutely love that because they think that they have a nailed breach. Most companies have not. There's usually a problem with batch to batch. Because the technical tolerance differences are like 10 parts per gallon versus 10 parts per billion. Like that technical tolerance is basically like the size of the earth next to a grain of rice. Like those technical tolerances are two totally different stratospheres. And I do think that science has not evolved where those technical tolerances are as easily tested. Like there's only a couple labs in the country that can actually test down to those tolerances.
Yeah.
And the at least the labs that I've spoken with here, they've been able to narrow down their methodology to actually test to reach, but even they're, they're experts. And I mean, I'm talking with like chemists that have PhDs in like microbiology or like analytical chemistry. One particular chemist, she's got two PhDs in analytical chemistry, and she's even just kind of thrown her hands up like, I can test the exact same chemical, and if the temperature is off by like 1 degree in the room, suddenly it fails for this type of testing versus using like the same universal lab that everybody's supposed to use in Europe, CTL. And CTL's backlog is so substantial that it takes 8, 9 months to test for anything, and, like, that is just not realistic for an individual manufacturer. So, trying to impart the REACH regulations here in the US with the deficit between, like, A to B, I don't think is realistic, and I think, in fact, would actually cause more of a public health crisis for tattooing and significantly put the consumer at risk. I've
Yeah.
never totally agreed with the methodology and the testing behind reach because some of the methods that they're using and the machinery that they're using is kind of bunk science because they're adding different mediums to the individual testing mechanisms that basically change the outputs every single time. And the testing method is not the same all the way across the board. Like they're not testing the reds even the same way. They're not testing the yellows even the same way. Like all this stuff is all subjugated science, and it's just because like a lab kind of says that it will pass to a certain point. And I think that leaves a lot of room for interpretation, where the very large manufacturers would significantly benefit from reach being a standard, but smaller manufacturers, that's going to dilute the quality of the products and a bunch of other really strange things. And it's just, I personally am gonna stay invested with this stuff until I know that reach is not going to be a threat here in the US because of the problems that I've seen specifically with reach inks. Some of the worst adverse events that I've ever seen have come from reach inks. Um,
Yeah.
and that I I would have a really hard time banking my reputation as a tattoo artist on reach inks. I can't do it. And I don't agree with it either.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of artists are from my research. I don't think a lot are. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Business of Tattooing. Now, let's talk some real business. You're already using Electrum products. You're already tagging Electrum products because you love Electrum products. But why aren't you getting paid for using and tagging Electrum products? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because you haven't signed up to Electrum Insiders yet. But now you can, and it's real easy. Just scan this QR code on your screen or go to electrumsupply.net today to learn about Electrum Insiders and how you can earn cold hard cash for doing what you're already doing. We want to thank you at Electrum for using our products, so we created the Electrum Insiders program exclusively for artists just like you. So don't hesitate. Get on over to electrumsupply.net today and start earning money for the content that you're already creating. Now, let's get back to this week's episode. In fact, we've been on the fence about releasing Reach pigments for, the last 12 months at least now, because we've had a Reach line ready. And I'm like, do I want to pull the trigger and spend this 12,000 euros that I got to spend to send these things over to CTL and have them tested? Because 12,000 euros is a pretty significant investment for number one. And like you said, it's going to take a month to test my stuff and get my certifications to me if they pass. If they don't pass, then I have to go through that whole testing process all over again and wait more months.
Pay for it again and everything
And so
else.
then I'm reaching out to my distributors in Europe and I'm like, hey, uh, how well are Reach Inks even selling in Europe? You know what I mean? Is this even worth like is there enough sales to be had to justify the time and energy and expense in launching this Reach line of inks? Because yeah, as a manufacturer, we feel like they're good. Like that was one benefit that I had in our ink brand, is that we didn't have European ink sales established when I started manufacturing ink.
Yeah.
Whereas some of the legacy companies out there have a large portion of their business was dependent on European ink sales.
Mm-hmm.
So when the REACH regulations came down, I mean, it's like, if you can't produce a REACH compliant ink, how is that going to negatively impact your sales? Well, to me, it
Yeah.
impacted it zero, because I didn't even have European ink sales under my belt. So it was easy for me to say, hey, internally, hey guys, let's take the time that we need to take to actually develop these inks, test these inks in skin. How do they heal after 18 months? How do they heal after 2 years? What do they
Yeah.
look like when they come back? Are they still vibrant? Are they bright? Are our clients having any reactions to them? Is this really a product that we're comfortable with launching? Because I think a lot of ink companies were forced to do that really fast, go through that process really, really fast
Yes.
to keep their business where it was used to being. You know what I mean? Because Reach did have a very significant negative impact on the ink market in Europe, for sure. Still is.
It did, and it probably will for a really long time. And a lot of people aren't really aware of this, but the concentrations that were basically assigned in the REACH regulation was based on a model that is not accurate. You were in the conversation for that at WCTP, but to break it down a little bit further for anyone else not familiar with the regulation, as tattoo artists, we know that 100% of the ink that is in the cap does not go into the skin. And the assumption was made because there were not competent, qualified professionals from the tattoo industry representing during the legislative process in Europe that 100% of that ink was being absorbed into the body and into the bloodstream, and that's not accurate. And in the last 2 years, we have figured out through some of the different scientific cooperatives and research that's coming out of Europe that the metabolization of the ink, or how much ink is actually being absorbed into the body, is actually closer to 30%, which calls into question that the technical tolerances associated with REACH are egregiously over. And, you know, the way that Europe works, Europe is not very quick to change its mind with anything. So the scientists are very heavily scrutinizing the regulatory authorities and saying, hey, your math is wrong. So for anyone here in the US that's looking at REACH as like the supposed like model and saying like, oh, this is the metric and model of safety, what you're not paying attention to is the other chemicals that are having to be used in place of products that we've been using for the last 25, 35, even 65 years, like vegetable glycerin, or like blue 15, which has not changed in the last 50, 56 years was what the oldest pigment sample was that I was able to collect. Those products over in Europe are not necessarily well tested, and we don't have long-term data that shows the safety. So the assessment that just because they went through the REACH process or REACH regulations that they're automatically safer or better quality is not accurate. And this is 100% a case where a regulatory agency was facing public pressure. They made a lot of decisions, but because there was not accurate representation from the tattoo industry, that's where overregulation came in and has substantially put at risk public health in the area. And now we're seeing the effects of it, and probably will see the effects of it for the next 10 to 15 years because of just the legislative structure over in Europe. And that's kind of sad because, as a tattoo artist, just like I have very old roots in tattooing. When I see my brothers and my sisters and, my family, because that's what I consider tattoo artists at this point,
Mhm.
is like everybody's extended family at this point. Just because I know about this stuff, I worry about my family or distant relatives in tattooing that have zero idea of what's happening to the craft that they love. And I look at them and I'm just like, man, if these regulations come in, you might not be able to make your mortgage payment. You might not be able to buy safe products. you might be forced to have to make your own tattoo inks and may have significant problems from that. And like those are the things where my head's at and why I stay consistently motivated and consistently effort this, and then I see people like yourself who are trying to stand up and who are trying to do the right thing. And you may not understand some of this stuff, but hey, I'm a phone call away, and just trying to support manufacturers as a whole. Like, I make myself available because I do have a unique skill set with this. And I worry about what's going to happen to the future of the industry of tattooing and really just the businesses and like all these people that have their entire lives wrapped up in this. Like,
Hmm.
nobody's paying attention to it. So, come hell or high water, I'm still going to be here. I'm still going to be watching and I'm still going to keep pushing and I'm still going to keep educating the artists that, do want to take a proactive approach instead of a reactive approach. And I think
Right.
that's what happened in Europe was it was more reactive and happened after the fact. Whereas here in the United States, we have the ability to be more proactive.
Yeah, so I want to go back a little bit and talk about on that note, I want to talk about injection term, right? Because this is one thing that I think about. And then also the blue and green band under the reach regulations. Those two things specifically.
Hmm.
So there are efforts to get the injection term removed from the language, right?
Hmm.
And there are initiatives that are trying to reverse the blue and green bands, right? So my mind though goes back to wondering like how easy is it, how difficult of a battle are those things, right? Like how the injection term, for example, is so deeply interwoven into regulatory language. Like it's deep. I mean, it's in a lot of things that you read. Like that word is very very ingrained in language. It's been there for a while. So
Hmm.
so even if we produce, which we have some, if we produce mountains of data that says, look, this is not an injectable, here's all the data to support that. How easy do you think it is to get that language reversed? Like how difficult of a challenge is that?
I think it's going to be an uphill battle, but I think it it becomes easier when you have more people saying the same message and when we have like the same sources and the same data. And that's why I think that it's imperative that the constituent bases collectively form, specifically with like, those that manufacture the products and then those that, are the ethical tattoo, bases. And then like you have like the regulatory communities and then kind of once the language or at least the research that APT and I've been able to put together, um, I would say moving that research through all of those places and then when all of those bodies collectively believe the same thing and have the same information, regulatory agencies can change their mind about certain things when they're presented data in the right methods. And presenting data in the right methods varies from agency to agency, but I do think that it's a start when there is peer reviewed evidence and peer reviewed research. And I'm not talking about peers as in like the tattoo community, I'm talking people that have PhDs, people from academia, individuals that have like that type of like prolific academic background where they are siding with competent, qualified professionals, and then the data becomes socialized across those networks. And then whenever there's an opportunity to have a conversation with FDA, like during public hearings and things like that, then the data gets submitted and it gets pushed through the processes. At that point, I do think that it's possible to see the language change. My experience is not really on that side of the fence. My experience is more in culminating the data and collecting and, going and tapping the professionals in my respective like networks and whatnot. So I do think it's possible to change it. I don't know how quickly that's going to happen. I've been told by regulatory officials as well as independent contractors and independent people that are consultants that work around those spaces. Hey, this is the information that you need. Go find these things. and they've got experience with dealing with this in different industries that are adjacent to tattooing. So I've just kind of been following that footwork and collecting everything and kind of pulling all that data so that it's parsed together. Europe, in my experience between Europe and the US, I think that the US is more apt to listen than the European regulatory agencies. Regulatory agencies in Europe, you have to really um, basically drop a stick of dynamite on their doorstep to get them to even open the door and listen to you and have a conversation. FDA, you can knock on the door and they'll at least, hey, I'm going to switch open the peephole and I'm going to have a conversation with you through the door. There's different layers and levels with this type of stuff. Um, as far as overturning for the blue and green, I think the mechanisms in order to turn that over and actually change that legislation finding, there's probably going to be at least 3 to 5 papers similar to what we're talking about, what we've done here with APT, with the challenging the terminology injection. So there would have to be several different things that would have to kind of congruent information to go to the table and have all the ducks in the row, and then bam, here is our information and our evidence.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's really important to highlight the importance of that terminology, right?
Yes.
Everything that's built on the term injection, right? So like if we didn't get that terminology changed in the United States
Hmm.
and regulations are built around that word, what are the implications to the tattoo industry around the word injection? What does that mean for the tattoo artist's career? What does that mean for regulations as it pertains? Let's just talk about tattoo needles, for example, right? Like if injection is part of the terminology when it comes to regulations, does that mean that tattooing becomes a medical practice?
Yes.
And then if it
That's
becomes a
the real
medical
estate.
practice, what does that mean to me as a practitioner? What does that mean to me in relation to the tools that I use? It has a whole domino effect of what I would
Mhm.
consider negative impact on the tattoo industry.
It 100% does. So if something like injection, if that regulatory effort or that like regulatory premise happens, it has this cascade effect of disrupting the flow of business for the products. So you may only be able to sell the products to somebody that has a license like nursing or something like that. Like they might have to have like an RN license to engage in a medical procedure, or they may have to be overseen by a medical doctor in order to even practice. So that 50% cut that you're getting at like a standard tattoo studio, you might only get 20% if they've got to pay a doctor to oversee the entire procedure. Like that's risk number one. And then that screws up for the manufacturer because there's all these other different health sanitation protocols and things that are not necessarily applicable that you're going to have to do as a manufacturer. And then you're also going to have to pay for additional testing. And at some point in that line, you're gonna have to engage in animal testing, like, which is a really big problem in the tattoo industry because animal testing, one, it's not accurate, it's inhumane, the practices are completely fucking barbaric. Like the uh the preemptive effects that happen when something is considered an injection is absolutely detrimental to the business of tattooing. Not only from a product side, but even from like the practitioner side. And I just don't think tattoo artists are aware of how real that threat is. Like that bottle of ink that costs $20 to $25. Guess what? It's going to be $150. Those needles that you need to use for your tattoo product, you know how you have like an entire drawer in like a craftsman style toolbox? Guess what? You're only going to have 3 different types of needles because they're $175 to $300 a box. Oh, you don't like the type of bandages that you want to use. You like being able to have the flexibility to use between like a gauze bandage or the second skin type of bandage or something like that. Guess what? Well, you're going to have to pay $300 for a box of those damn things because they're going to have to be sterilized, and they have to be sterilized in such a way and have lot tracing and traceability and all these other different things. So, like, you know, there's this giant fucking elephant in the room that this industry is not prepared to deal with. And I think if more tattoo artists realized that they were supporting lower quality companies that are contributing to more of those problems and making that timeline shift faster, they would probably second guess where they're actually spending their money, and they would probably in lieu go follow an ethical manufacturer who's engaging in these discussions and actually makes it a point to participate in this stuff to protect their livelihoods instead of just buying shit on Amazon.
Yeah.
Go buy all the crap that you want on Amazon. You're going to make that money today, but guess what? You're probably not going to have a career in 5 years if you keep doing
Yeah, and I think it's important to talk about. I mean, that's a very scary thing that we just kind of hit on. You know, that's like a panicky thing kind of topic.
that.
But also, we're not there. I mean, that's not the reality of the tattoo world today. But it is a very realistic picture of where we could end up. Like we should discuss that because that is a very real possibility. I mean, that is on the table. That could happen.
Yeah.
We're doing everything we can to make sure it doesn't happen. And that's again more of the reason why people need to get educated and get engaged in these conversations and be, I was surprised in the AFTO conference of how few people from the tattoo space were there. Like I was like, where are all my people at? Like, where is everybody?
Yeah.
Like there was no ink manufacturers there. I mean, Sean Brown was there, which I consider him an ink manufacturer. I mean, he's definitely very knowledgeable in the ink space, so he spent a lot of years there.
Yeah.
But short of me and him and Brian Everett, and I was just like, there's really not a lot of people that have a really good working knowledge of tattoo pigments, right? Like,
Mm.
and that was really alarming to me because this is like a huge focus of the conversations in the room, right? Like this is what we're talking about. And but I think like what so you're involved with a lot of the manufacturers. You have discussions with a lot of people. How do you feel? How aligned do you feel like the majority of the ink manufacturers are in the space today? Like how close do you feel like they are in their efforts, or do you feel like there's still a pretty big gap?
There's some gaps. There's definitely some gaps, especially when it comes to the documentation, the testing, and then control of the products. Like I think that there's a lot of gaps that are happening there. Personally, I would like to see some more harmonized discussion about just, hey, just so you guys are aware, other industries have dealt with this. You do not need to reinvent the wheel. Here is a system and a protocol in which that can be adopted directly to your products to make this substantially more cost effective for you, but also more ethical. Like, I do think that there are some problems with that, and I get it, like, you gotta keep the doors open and the lights on, and sometimes it's more attractive to buy the lower quality pigments that may not have the same rigorous testing, but some manufacturers are not aware of the cost of that, and I'm talking about the long-term cost of, you may buy the cheaper powdered powdered pigment and immerse it and turn it into your own dispersion solution and then scale up from your tattoo inks because that's a conversation that I don't think a lot of tattooers are ready to have is there's a little difference between pre-dispersed pigment versus powder pigment that you actually assemble yourself. Like you're engaging in some form of dispersion as pertains to science and polymetric science and a couple other different things. Because if you add any of those parts together, that chemically it's all pretty much the same fucking thing. So if you're buying the cheaper product in the beginning, it's shit in, it's shit out.
Right.
So you use lower quality pigment at the beginning of your process, you're going to pop positive for the heavy metals and amines and micro and all this other stuff, which is going to cost you more money in the long run. So it's more cost effective to buy the better premium quality pigments in the initial and then control that process of the manufacturing. Because most of the companies that I've worked with over the years, they don't they buy the pre-pigment or pre-dispersed stuff and they have a control agreement because of the amount of equipment that you have to have for hazmat in order to take the powder pigment and actually turn it into something. So like there's miscommunication all across the board and there's different fractionization that's happening with tattoo artists in general. And I just think that there needs to be better education across the board. And that's one of the goals that I've had for my tenureship with working with APT, is to focus on some of that education so that hopefully more people like myself who are ethical and want to practice this type of stuff but are also interested in getting involved in that, that there's a pathway for them to start learning about this so that they can kind of aspire and go into the next level. Because every so often, like, I'm approached by individual tattoo artists who are like, I'm gung ho, I want to work on this type of stuff. And then when they start getting into the weeds and they realize like how many different little like bubbles of things that there are, it becomes ridiculously overwhelming for people. And like, the reason why I chose chemistry in general was just because chemistry is where my brain aligns and I understand that. So it was almost like a shoe in once I understood like the chemical science associated with tattooings. Tattooings is just my current focus. That doesn't mean that I don't have experience in dealing with aftercare or like
Mhm.
any other submersive solutions, and then like the trickle down effect of all of that stuff as well. I just think that collectively it's important to stay informed right now with what's going on, because the changes can be very subtle but they have a trickle effect and it can kind of ripple out. And I applaud you for having these conversations and hosting these discussions, especially as a manufacturer, because a lot of people are really intimidated to talk, just like what you were describing earlier in our chat, and saying like, yeah, I'm scared to put the wrong information out there. And across the board, I would say there's gaps in misinformation across the manufacturers. Some manufacturers are not really aware of what they're doing as far as like a chemical standpoint. And some manufacturers don't even have a chemist on site or on staff. And
Right.
the problem with that is that there's this assumption of, oh, I can just do it myself. Well, we're beyond that as an industry. You're not going to know what acetaldehyde is or PAHs or amines or even how those accumulate unless you have an organic chemistry degree. And most of the people that manufacture these products don't have a background in chemistry, and they don't understand like the additional levels of sanitation that go in with that, because we're not concerned about the things that we can see or the things that we can measure in like our own benchtop equipment. We're concerned with the things that you can't see that you have to test for when it comes to
Right.
tattooing. And you're not going to know those types of things or even really what to be on the lookout for without working with chemists that have a background in that type of material and that material science. And there are whole industries that rely on those types of chemists, and specifically like cosmetics, car paints, industrial applications, road paint, all those different industries, they all rely on chemists to one point or another. And there's a reason why it's complicated the way that it is.
Yeah, and it's good. I know we have a call next week to talk about the kind of the group that Sean and I are putting together.
Mm.
Which is a manufacturers alliance, which is kind of what we've been needing. I mean, we had a
Yeah.
start of it with CTS, but that just kind of got derailed for numerous reasons. So, there's definitely been a gap there while someone else has, while the industry's kind of waited for somebody else to pick that torch up and kind of carry it forward. And so I think that's what we're going to try to do with
Yeah.
TIMA. But TIMA is basically just a collective group of resources, right? It's
Yeah.
it's people like you and the APT and just all those resources collectively. Because one thing that I see as a disconnect still is like when you talk about APT, AFDO, NEHA, APP, all these groups that are out there, they all have, like APT, for example, is more focused on tattoo artists and
Hmm.
practices of tattoo artists, right? It's not APT is not necessarily focused on manufacturing, right? It's not where
Yeah,
they
that's not our bag.
that's not their bag. AFDO is not necessarily focused on manufacturing. And
Hmm.
AFDO is not necessarily focused on the tattoo artists. They have their own focus. So all
Yep.
these groups have a specialized focus, but they all kind of work collectively together to try to feed that universal piece. But one thing that I see as a struggle with all of that is that there's a lot of disconnect between what people are working on. For example, like
Yep.
if you're in the AFDO calls and you're talking about safety substantiation around product ingredients, for example. That's not necessarily like the manufacturing space may be far beyond that, right? Like we've already analyzed, we've done all of our safety substantiation on our tattoo inks. We have all this documented. We have all this safety data stuff put together. We have all of this stuff that we've already done. So it's like I feel like there's just a lot of like sometimes what I would consider wasted energy in some of these groups because I
Yeah.
feel like it's like how do you get like and this is what I talk about with Sean all the time. I'm like, Sean, when we're forming this group, I want to make sure that we're not causing a negative impact on other groups and the efforts that they're putting in, right? Because I
Yeah.
want to make sure that we're complementing the work that AFDO is doing, that we're complementing the work that the APT is doing, and that we're not really setting out to do something completely outside the box. We're really just trying to build a collective resource for manufacturers. So, for example, my experience with other ink manufacturers, for example, is that, and this is one of those things where I have to be careful what I say because I don't want to say the wrong thing, right? But I feel like there's pretty big gaps between the ink manufacturers in relation to where they are in the MOCRA process, for example. Like some
Yep.
people are at step A, some people are at step X.
Mm-hmm.
And what the group that Sean and I want to put together is basically a resource that helps all of the manufacturers get to the same place in time at the same time. Like if the FDA comes and knocks on company A, B, C, or D's door, the answers are the same universally. The processes look
Yeah.
the same. We got our shit together. We're talking amongst each other. We're working together to do these processes and get these things. You know, are you first steps first? Is your facility registered with the FDA? Are your products registered with the FDA? Yes or no? If they're not, let's take you by the hand and show you how to complete that
Mm-hmm.
process. Let's make sure we're all through that door.
Yeah, because the strategy with alignment in that way and working as a constituent base with what you guys are doing in that space, I think is going to leverage the opportunities, but also create harmonization across the board. I do think that that's important. If that's not done, then you start running the risk of like the fractionalization where, the left hand's not talking to the right hand, and then all of a sudden in the middle when they meet the regulation, the definitions are totally different. And then that creates like a regulatory minefield, and that regulatory minefield trickles down and impacts the business of the individual tattoo artist, but it also makes the regulator's job even harder. And in this space, the more that you can not necessarily dilute the information, but the more streamlined that you can make the information for the regulatory professional, the better and the easier that things tend to go. And I did have a conversation yesterday with Sean about TIMA, and I offered, hey, there are certain things that I would be able to help with as far as like annexing the information and kind of creating like a centralized database, because like I've been in most of the camps at this point, and
Right.
I was not involved with CTS, but that was at the beginning of my perception of understanding. And then I had gotten involved with APT, and I've worked with NEHA and AFTO. So I know the general space, but I also same thing. I still see the gaps. I still see, the deficit and the bottlenecks of communication. And I personally, I would love the opportunity to be able to kind of harmonize those efforts, because I know so much about cosmetic science where a lot of this information already exists. And, if I understood more about what the risk assessment was for the individual manufacturers and could see like a larger scope of like, here's a map, here's where people are struggling, here's where the information is missing, and try to make like harmonization efforts through that, I think it would stabilize the tattoo industry in a way where the business would be a little more secure, and we wouldn't be catastrophizing things as much, and there wouldn't
Mhm.
be as much anxiety about the what's happening and who's doing what kind of type stuff. And I just don't think that's going to be alleviated and really solidify the market where, you have the lifers who kind of have that reinstilled vigor back in them, and they feel like tattooing is great and tattooing is awesome again. And like, that just doesn't exist because there's so many different little camps and there's all these different things. And, it's the thing that I love about the tattoo industry. Like I love the diversity and I love the culture and I love the differences from like, the different communities of tattooing, but at the core we're all doing the same thing and that baseline has not been established yet. And I think that this would be a really smart alternative and a really smart play in the regulatory landscape to try to harmonize those efforts. So
Yeah.
I'm hopeful to see what comes and how I can participate and help.
Yeah, well, I think we need it's a blessing to the industry to have people like you engaged on that level and be as passionate as you are. And I look and I'm like, man, how do you have time to do do all this stuff, because even when we were working together, I'd be like, gosh, how are you and Laurel have time
Yeah.
to plug in on this stuff? Not just with me, but with numerous people. And then you guys weren't like this was just like pro bono work. You guys were
Yeah.
like, hey, let's get on a call and help you get through this stuff and like understand these things. And I was like, geez, that's awesome. Like that's really incredible that you guys are devoting your time to doing that stuff. So again,
Yeah.
applause for that.
Thank you. Um,
Yeah.
Several years ago, I kind of figured out that my sweet spot with tattooing is about 3 to 4 days a week. One day is particularly like an admin type day, and that usually gets like broke down for like half of its design stuff, and then the other half of it's like my administrative work on my website, do my marketing, all that type of stuff. So I have like a full free day that I was just like, huh, I need to fill my time with something. What am I gonna do? Sit around and paint? Nah, that's kind of boring. Like, I'll pick it up from time to time. Like, I've admittedly, like, I've been drawing since I was about 3 years old. So,
Yeah.
like, I can see something and immediately, like, draw it. I have a freakishly uncanny ability with that type of stuff. And like every once in a while, like I'll pick up sewing or like I'll pick up like leather work or like my recent thing is like processing my own animals from like butchering and like so like I do like all this like random ass shit and like I usually get like this, how do you have time for all this stuff? Well, time management. I don't like I wake up at like 7 o'clock in the morning. I go to bed relatively early. I don't watch TV. I don't play video games. Like, in fact, I'm relatively boring. Like, I don't really do anything outside of
Yeah.
like my like training my dogs and hiking and like hunting and all that type of stuff and like tattoo. Like that's it. And I read a lot.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
I often wonder, what do people do with their free time when they have free time? I have a garden. I pick green beans and can green beans and make tomato sauce. Like,
Yeah, like slight bit of like home, like I think most of us tattooers who are like in this like age group, we've all kind of like slightly gone like homesteadery and like I live in the middle of nowhere and I hunt on my weekends and I help my friends like do animals and stuff because like
we
yeah.
make beef jerky.
I mean, I butchered a chicken a couple weeks ago because he was very naughty and attacked my friend, and my friend was like, "Well, he's gonna make great chicken nuggets, but like he's kind of worthless because like he tried to peck out my eyeballs." And I'm like, "All
Oh,
right, cool."
gosh. Uh, hey,
That
how do you feel about h- so there's a big pet peeve that I have, especially when it comes to regulations, and I struggle with how to deal
oh,
with it. Do you know where I'm going?
I'm waiting. I'm waiting.
Okay. So if I'm scrolling through social media, and now let's look at the history of tattooing, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Most manufacturers in the tattoo space, I feel like, are tattoo artists.
Yeah,
Most products in the tattoo space are born from tattoo artists.
sure.
Tattoo ink, for example, historically was made in the back of a tattoo shop by a tattoo artist, and
Yeah.
that's how it was done. I mean, back in the day. And I talk about this story a lot too, as my grandfather was in World War II, and he had these two tattoos on his forearms. And in his 70s and 80s, you couldn't even make out what these were. They just looked like green splotches of something that was used to be something, right? So
Mm-hmm.
after 60 years in his skin and tons of sun exposure, it's just no longer a legible tattoo. And I often wondered, geez, I wonder what the hell did they use for tattoo ink when he got those tattoos. You know what I mean? Like what the hell was the
Mhm.
quality of that? You know, like he probably got those tattoos on a pier in a freaking port somewhere, you know? And but today when I'm scrolling through social media, I'll see a tattoo artist like holding up a bag of powder pigment and they're like, I'm making tattoo inks. And I'm like, oh, please take that off of social media. You know, just like, please don't do that. But it still happens a lot, right? I
It
think
does.
social media is so powerful, but also has the ability to be so destructive.
Mhm. It does. I think
The education, I guess, is
the years of just like stuff that's up here with like social media in the association of like tattoo products. So like first off, where's your research and where's your evidence? Have you read a scientific article in a document and were you trained to actually decipher and decode what that peer reviewed evidence and research says? If it was not peer reviewed or it was not extensively researched and you believe that it's just tribal knowledge, that's fine. However, you need to take into account that science has a really healthy weight and should have a healthy weight in this opinion. And just because something's been done for however many years doesn't mean it's the right way and that science hasn't evolved past a certain point. We should be growing and collectively evolving as an industry because even the forefathers and foremothers of tattooing would probably be paying attention to what the hell is going on in the industry right now, and they probably wouldn't be turning up their noses at individual tattoo machines or things like this over the years. And oh, this was the way that it's always been done, blah, 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 blah. Well, that's fine, but you need to park that attitude for a second and pay attention to science and actually start looking at things objectively a little bit more because we are permanently altering people's bodies for the rest of their life. And there may be unseen consequences that we do not have the evidence or the evidential support to be able to say what something is doing and or happening. So when you sit there and you post things like, "Oh, I got my powder pigments and I'm making my own tattoo inks." Like, great, novel effort. You might not know enough about microbiology to make that safely and not basically create formaldehyde in a bottle that you're directly injecting into somebody's body. Like, you might not know enough about that.
well, yeah, and I think education, that's the big thing. You know, that remains to be the big focal point. You know, we have to educate ourselves. And I think from my personal experience and the artists that I talk to, I feel like a lot of artists are doing a good job in that area. You know, I see a lot of artists that are very passionate about knowledge about the products that they're using. They're asking me as a manufacturer, they're asking me the right questions. They're asking me for things. They're very tuned into what they're putting on their clients' bodies, and so there are a lot of artists out there doing that, and I think it's important to highlight that too because I think we all have to strive for that
Mhm. I
in our
would love to
practices.
see that. I would love to see that more common. I think it's far too uncommon to have an individual tattoo artist asking those types of questions right now. I think that that needs to be more of a consistent thing, and I think that there need to be better education systems set up to train the tattoo artists and then make it where they can have a conversation. Because, like, personally, I think that there's a big breakdown in communication between manufacturers and individual tattoo artists because, again, this is what goes back to language because they weren't taught the right language, or maybe they didn't have a quality apprenticeship or quality education. They don't know what certain things are called and they don't know about some of this information. Like, huge misconception that I see in the tattoo industry today and constantly have to deal with is the assumption that SDS sheets contain information about the chemicals that are in there. Well, MSDS sheets were basically the language was changed back in 2014. So MSDS sheet has no variance on the SDS sheet, which is an international harmonization effort by the World Health Organization. And a lot of people don't know that. But the only thing that's on the SDS sheet, or relatively should be on the SDS sheet, are things that could cause harm under OSHA statutes or international statutes, not the full composition of the ingredients. So when I see tattoo artists requesting SDS sheets, it's like, okay, so you want to know what the chemical hazards are for that individual product. It's not really going to tell you anything about the product.
Hmm.
And, tattoo artists getting frustrated. No, it's supposed to contain this information. No, it doesn't. I can point you to the federal statute. The federal statute says that only products of concern or individual causes of concern should be on that SDS sheet. And that's complicating for a manufacturer, because you have tattoo artists that are coming in and saying, oh, I want an SDS sheet and it's supposed to contain all this information in there. Never mind the fact that you're going to have two different types of SDS sheets, which is a shitload more work because the regulatory agency that you have to deal with for import and export, they're gonna flip the fuck out if you hand them that information where it's got every fucking pigment in there, every fucking everything, and not just the chemicals of concern. And that is one of the biggest regulatory threats that I see from the misinformation between the tattoo artist and the manufacturer, is a breakdown in that communication because there's not consistent education that kind of harmonizes that.
Right, right. Well, I think
Yeah.
that's where the APT comes in, really, in my mind.
Yeah.
That's why it's advantageous for artists to be part of APT, because that's where they can get that resources to that education.
Mhm.
And I feel like the APT is really working hard to try to make that education process more and more formalized every single day. That's
Yeah, we host a ton of education classes and seminars that are a part of your membership when you join APT, and we have a pretty healthy community in which that we have a lot of open dialogue. We do spend a phenomenal amount of time, myself included, producing classes or webinars to basically get you up to speed and get you in the know because, we're over here in the Emerald City behind the curtain and we see all of this crap all the time. So my language is totally different. And sometimes like there is a bit of decoding that is needed because of just, how far I'm involved with some of this stuff. And sometimes I have to explain things, but we're also training more people so that there's more of the competent experts in the community to continue to reach out into the community and offer these education systems. Because like it's just unnerving to me that, a lot of tattoo artists don't really understand simple things about some of these products because there was not a really merited based education system within tattooing up until the last few years. And, that puts clients at a disadvantage. It puts artists at a disadvantage because they're not going to be able to protect their businesses and they're not going to be able to protect their livelihoods. And then, there's this whole other side of that communication breakdown makes it harder for them to do business and really, thrive in the tattoo industry. And the common denominator with APT being able to kind of challenge that and offer education systems as a part of your membership was something that collectively everyone sitting around the table on the board of directors just felt so passionately moved by. Like, I want to help my fellow tattoo artist. We want to gift all of this information back into the community because we really believe strongly in it. And we're all really passionate about making sure that people get good tattoos. I don't care that you tattoo photorealism or you tattoo traditional and you only use coil tattoo machines, or hell, you even make your own needles, or you're a disposable only facility that tattoos on the weekends. I don't care at what level that you tattoo. I just want to support you to be able to do it better because when somebody comes to you to get tattooed, you have an ethical obligation to do the best job that you can because that person's going to live with that tattoo for the rest of their life. And me as an elder tattoo artist, I want to be able to support that. And I want to help uplift other tattoo artists because I don't want them to have it as hard as I did or as hard as you did
right.
back in the day when we had to make all of our own products. Like, that shit sucked. I can't tell you how many times I had to wake up at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning and make needles for hours before I even went to the shop. And then, the nights that I stayed, like, now I have like a healthy work-life balance and I don't want to go back to those days. I don't want to go back to the days where we're so overregulated that we can't tattoo. Like, let's do
Yeah,
better, you
yeah.
know?
Yeah, I'm grateful for organizations like APP, and I think it's important to highlight too. I've recently come to recognize the importance of the APP, for example, and I talk about this a lot now because
Mm.
I have people come to me and ask me for piercing recommendations all the time. Like, who do you go to get pierced? And I say, hey, here's who I go to. In your area, if you go for make sure that whoever you go to is an APP certified piercer. Like, that's what I tell people now. So,
Yeah.
and because I feel like the APP is just so far advanced, like, that,
Yeah, their standards, their practices, I mean, they've really elevated the systems of piercing and the education to actually make piercing into a respectable trade. And it's so heartwarming to see it because they're probably about 15 years ahead of where the tattoo industry is going to wind up being. And it's good to see these types of things because it lets me know that it's going to be okay. Like,
yeah,
while I have the concerns of overregulation and I admittedly I am ridiculously critical of the government, which is ironic, and that's how I wound up getting into the space because I was just very critical of the federal regulations associated with tattoo products and I wanted to know the why behind it. But it's gonna be okay. There is a long-term sustainability here, but I think tattoo artists would be remiss of not paying attention to this information and making the small steps today versus the long, costly steps if they waited until the law is actually enacted. And I think that, if you're not doing it for the preservation of your business, do it for the health of your clients or pay attention to these things just so you can kind of take the small steps now before you have very, very chaotic changes later on because it's a matter of time. Regulations are coming, whether you like it or not. It's a matter of controlling the chaos. And that's really the place in which that these organizations like APT and what I'm hoping to see with TIMA is that's our space. And we do it because we feel an ethical obligation to do it, but the flip side of it is I'm also doing it for selfish reasons because I want to make sure I'm in the know. If I have to make adjustments in my personal business, I want to know where the information is sourced and coming from so that I can make those steps today so they're not as costly later on.
yeah, that's a good point. So, in relation to information and resources that people could go, if there are artists listening to this podcast episode, for example, and they want to, they are incentivized to go out and research some things based on this conversation that we've had. In your mind, where are a couple of places that an artist should go to first to start learning about what's happening in the landscape and how they can get involved in the education side of things and uh,
I would say the first thing is listening and engaging with podcasts like this and understanding what the general acronyms are and what these things are. Understanding what APT is, it's a network of individual tattoo artists who are experts with different things, and we weigh in on different opinions because we either have the experience, like I myself, I have a background in manufacturing of tattoo inks and technical chemical science within the performance and the aging of tattoo pigments in skin. And I've worked with medical practitioners over the years doing this. So I myself, I produce a lot of blog content or written material that gets circulated through any of the AFTO, NEHA, and whatnot, but also it goes through the channels with the APT. And, I would say APT is probably the first step for any tattoo artist who's interested to just kind of have a holistic view because we really have like a 360-degree view about what's going on. Another place that's going to be is engaging with manufacturers and asking questions. If you have a particular manufacturer that you really enjoy, that you really like, engage in dialogue with them. They may know certain things, they may point you in different directions, they may say, "Hey, I'm participating with this particular thing," etc. And then right behind that is going to be your peer-reviewed research. Cannot stress it enough. Just because something has always been done a certain way doesn't mean that that's the right way, and science has not evolved to a certain point. Peer-reviewed research and academic research, especially from the National Institute of Health, NIH, some FDA bulletins, the warning letters, things like that. Go on the FDA website, go read it for yourself. USA.gov. You can go read any of those types of things, and you should be reading those types of things to have like the initial understanding of some of this stuff, to understand some of the acumen and where some of these regulations are going on. It's kind of hit or miss. There's all these different things that are going on, but go read what the law says, go read what the federal government is saying, and then look up the sources. Because in the bottom, you can see the bibliography and you can see the citations, and you can go read that stuff for yourself. You don't have to take my personal opinion as an expert in the tattoo field. You can go read the stuff yourself. I'm going to be here and I'm still going to answer your questions, and you can still join APT and engage in dialogue with us, because we have quarterly meetings in which that we invite our membership to come pick our brains, come ask us questions. I'm in the call, Mick's in the call, Kate's in the call. She's got a fantastic background in education. Stacey Ray is also in the phone calls as well. She's got a prolific background in understanding of like scar and skin cellular therapies and different things of that nature. And we also have individuals from the permanent makeup space as well. So like, you want to have a question answered by experts who have been doing this for a really long time, APT is kind of like a no-brainer as far as an investment is. So, if I had to do it over again, I probably would have started more with APT than just going and reading all the peer-reviewed evidence and just being like, oh my God, what is fucking collapsing? Because, like, for real, it ain't that goddamn serious. It's
Right.
regulation. It takes forever. Like, break it down, take a couple steps back, go to the group of people who have like been around and like been through like the regulation wars and like COVID. Like, listen, we got some battle scars. We will trade stories. We will tell you the bullshit that you need to know about, because we want you to be in business as much as we want to be in business. So like, you want to know what the hell's going on? Go to APT. That's the easiest thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I always put the link to APT in the podcast descriptions too. It's on every episode. So if you are interested in learning more about the APT, just check out the description of the podcast and you'll see links to the APT website. How can people reach out to you? By the way, your blog, do you publish a blog independently or do you publish all your blog content through the APT website or both?
So most of it's through APT right now. I am in the process of adjusting my entire website and putting information on there for the general public, but also for tattoo artists. It's girly-tattoos.com. I'm pretty easy to find. You can pretty much just Google my name, and however many websites and podcasts and whatnot will come up. But you can reach out to me directly on my Instagram on Girly Tattoos. You can get in contact with me that way and join my mailing list that's set up on my website. And you can select whether you're an artist or if you're a tattoo client. So I don't really know the best way how to answer that, other than like most of the materials on APT right now, but there's a whole lot more stuff coming in the very near future on my website.
Yeah, that's good. I would encourage artists to reach out to you if questions, if they have them, and not trying to overwhelm you with things. But I think if you can get plugged into the APT website and read some of
Mhm.
Selena's posts there and some of her educational content, it would only benefit your knowledge and your skill set. So definitely seek out some of that information. And Selena, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. It's always a pleasure to
Absolutely.
talk to you. I always gain knowledge when we have conversations, so I really appreciate that. And
Yeah.
always thank you for your help and your openness and contributions to the tattoo community.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. I've been watching your work for a really long time, and I really appreciate your products. So you're one of the people that I hope to help through this work and, through my efforts with APT. Like when I'm kind of sitting late at night and I'm thinking about, did I make an impact today? Yours is one of the faces that pops up. So I'm glad to know that work is actually working and it's helping. So
Yeah,
thank you.
it's I think the biggest hurdle that we all have is just the motivation to keep going because it's very overwhelming and very tiring. And there's a lot of days where I'm just like, what, why? You know what I mean? But you said it earlier. The why is very simple. It's an obligation that we have to the craft that's families for so many years, and it continues feeding our families. And it's
Yeah.
not a matter of, there's just no question. I mean, it's just, this is what we have to do. We have to protect this industry going forward. We have to make sure that we're constantly evolving, that we're doing things the right way, and that we're protecting the interest of ourselves and our clients. And that's just the bottom line. That's as simple as it is for me.
Yep. I think it's an ethical thing. I'm gonna take a picture of us today. Yeah, I think it's an ethical thing. Um, and if you don't want to do that work and you don't want to participate in those conversations, at the very bare minimum, please get involved with the constituent base. APT, TIMA, any one of those different agencies, because your money is like voting. Okay, that money goes directly into coffers that pays for work and people to protect you and your business of tattooing.
Right.
And I know that APT has not always had the best publicity, and I know that some people have had like personal issues with it over the years, like full stop. Hi. I'm a person that's been involved in it for the last decade. And, if you want to get to know the organization, try it for 1 year. Just try it for 1 year. Please be a part of that conversation, because we need as many people that love tattooing to participate in these spaces to continue to protect. And the more constituents or the more individual tattoo artists and shops that we have participating in these conversation, the more access that we're going to be able to elevate the community and the trade of tattooing. And I invite every single person to come participate in the conversation. We need you.
Yeah, I would love to see an AFTO conference in the future where there's 100 of us there
Yeah,
representing, more, 500 of us, I would love to see that day. And I think we will see that day. I'm optimistic, and I know we will. So again, that's all due to efforts, with people like you and the APT and organizations like that. So again, thank you. It's been a great pleasure talking today.
absolutely.
Yeah. And I'll talk to you again next week.
Yes, I'm excited. I have lots of things for manufacturing firms and like all the cookies and all the great things, and I'm just like, I don't know what to do with all this stuff. Please give me something to do.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, I've learned through business, the way to be a successful business person is not by pretending that you know everything,
Hmm.
but by going out and finding the people that do and empowering them to do the right things and plug their expertise in where it matters the most.
Bingo. And that's the name of the game. Thank
Yep.
you so much. Thank you for having me on the podcast. Let me know whenever you go to publicize it and everything so I can cross post and everything. And look
Absolutely.
forward to starting more conversations around these topics and helping others understand, what they need to do to protect their businesses, but also to make healthy investments for their long term.